Powerlifters have it half right and half wrong. Bodybuilders also have it half right and half wrong. There's a lot you can learn from both if you want to maximize your gains.
You got to explain that.
Right. So powerlifters, or if you train with a powerlifting mentality, right? Low reps, you're trying to maximize strength. The goal is to make the weight feel as light as possible. Like if you ever train with a powerlifter, they're really good at maximizing biomechanics and leverage and the technique of the lift, right?
They're not thinking about the muscles.
Not at all.
They're just moving the weight.
They're moving the weight
as effectively as possible.
Yes, and they're trying to make it light. They're trying to make it feel light. Whereas a bodybuilder, what they're trying to do is they're trying to take an exercise and how can I make this weight feel as heavy as possible? How can I make the weight feel harder to create more tension on the muscle? Both have tremendous value. Both build muscle. Both are valuable skills depending on the phase of training that you're in.
Completely different mindsets.
Yes.
I love this tip because I actually think this takes a while of training consistently before you learn to like really apply this into your programming.
Totally.
And what I mean by that is all of us, whether we like it or not, tend to identify somewhat to some camp, right? As much as we talk about how all of us tend to gravitate towards a way of training. If I were to critique myself, I gravitate towards more of a bodybuilder type of mentality when I lift. If I were to critique you two, I think you guys gravitate more towards a strongman or powerlifting. And so what does that mean? Well, that means when Justin and Sal go to do 15, 20 reps, they have a tendency probably to want to put more weight on the bar and lift as much weight as they can for those 15 reps. Right. What I tend to do with powerlifting reps, if I'm doing let's say 1 to 5 reps, I have a tendency to not put enough weight on the bar because I'm trying to feel my glutes and squeeze, or feel my back and squeeze. And so learning how to take yourself out of that character and think like the person that tends to gravitate towards that type of rep range and learn how to apply that into your program. That takes a lot of skill.
Oh, if you've ever worked out, if you've ever done like a low rep training cycle with a bodybuilder or a high rep training cycle with a powerlifter, you could clearly see this. The powerlifter doing the cable crossovers and the laterals and the other stuff, it's like they have the same powerlifting mentality. It's about biomechanics and leverage. Whereas with the bodybuilder, you take them and you have them deadlift, and you can tell, like, what are you trying to do? You're trying to feel your lats. You're trying to squeeze your back. Don't do that. Just lift the weight in the most efficient, effective way possible. And like MAPS Anabolic, for example, is a great example of this. Phase 1, the goal is to lift the weight and do it in the most effective, efficient way possible. You get to phase 2 and phase 3, the weight isn't as important. It's about making the weight feel heavy. And if you cross those over, you mess up the whole thing.
Well, the clearest example I always see is when a bodybuilder goes to deadlift and you see like they're a bend in their elbow and they're always like pulling with a lot of upper body strength and really trying to muscle it up, as opposed to, you know, using that leverage and like their whole body in this like simultaneous type of a fluid movement to pull it up off the ground. And then on the other end of it, seeing, you know, a power lifter, like somebody like me, like when we were in Ben Pakulski's gym, and I'm like, you know, just trying to get through the reps and, you know, if I'm doing like, let's say like a lateral raise or something, and I'm doing the reps and he's slowing me way down and grinding my way through, and like every little detail of the angle of, you know, where I'm trying to pull like matters substantially.
Well, let's unpack it a little bit more, right? Like, what are some of the characteristics that are positive about each of those like types of like
great direction,
right? So a bodybuilder does like they a lot of times incorporate an isometric pause. They're slow. The tempo is slow and controlled. They squeeze at the top, like they're thinking about the muscle. Like, so weight is not normally a major focus. Yes, they progressively overload and lift more weight, but they are trying to make that weight as heavy as possible. They're more into the technique. They're more into slowing the tempo down and squeezing. When you go over to the power lifter or bodybuilder, I mean, it's speed, firing your CNS, like explosiveness, like just moving the weight as fast and as hard as you possibly can. Very, very different adaptations. And so if you train in that way or like that way for a long period of time, and then you ask each of those characters to move into the opposite type of rep range, meaning the opposite side of the spectrum, like the bodybuilder who does, supersets, 15 to 20 reps, a lot of pumping stuff, and say, okay, now I want you to run singles. He still thinks like a bodybuilder,
Yes.
and he wants to apply that to the 1 to 5. And the opposite is true for the power lifter who lifts 1 to 5 reps and grind and explosive fire in the scene. And then he goes over to do 15 reps and he tries to apply that, speed, explosive, grinding type of reps to the bodybuilder or the hypertrophy type training. And they both have a lot to learn from each other.
100%. Okay, so here's the big discrepancies I can see. Let's use an exercise like the bench press. Technique, let's start with that. Powerlifter they're both, by the way, I want to say this before we continue. They're both technical.
Yeah.
A bodybuilder and a powerlifter are both focusing on technique, but what they're focusing on is different. The powerlifter is modifying the technique to maximize leverage. How can I change my technique and positioning and form to lift the most amount of weight? The bodybuilder is thinking technique as well, but what they're thinking is, how can I move and change my body and positioning to feel this the most in the chest?
Increase their time under tension.
Yes, two very different things. And then let's talk about stress on the muscle. The powerlifter, although they're not necessarily thinking stress on the muscle because they're thinking weight, their primary means of doing so is extrinsic. I'm saying that wrong. There you go. It's adding weight to the bar, whereas a bodybuilder is more intrinsic. Can I make this feel harder by squeezing and contracting the muscle? They're both valuable.
Yes.
With the powerlifter, you're teaching, first off, you're learning your really good leverage and technique for maximizing the amount of weight you can lift, and that's going to carry over into the bodybuilding style training. You're also creating tremendous tension. You're also teaching your muscles how to organize and work together to lift something, which is a very valuable skill that you have to learn and strengthen because that's what makes you strong in the real world. Bodybuilders, what's the value there? They can target hypertrophy. They can target and focus, right? If you're always benching like a powerlifter and it just doesn't activate your chest as much because that's the best leverage for you, you're not going to develop the most muscular chest doing it that way versus a bodybuilder who can change their positioning to focus and feel on the area that they want to target. And by the way, with a powerlifter whose technique doesn't activate the chest as much and has good leverage, would they benefit from still having a bigger chest? They would. So them switching over to some bodybuilding training, get some hypertrophy, they would actually get stronger, and vice versa. The bodybuilder would gain from learning how to organize their muscles in a way to maximize force. So there's tremendous value, but the key here to understand, if you're listening to this and you don't care about competing in either sport, the thing you want to understand here is if you're lifting in really low rep ranges, train like the best people who lift in low rep ranges. Yeah. Train like them. Who is the best strength athletes in low rep ranges? Powerlifters. So you want to follow their mentality and their focus. Well, who are the best people at targeted hypertrophy? Bodybuilders. So when you get in those hypertrophy rep ranges, the 12 and 15 rep ranges, where you're getting the pump and your target sculpting your body, you want to follow their mentality and learn from both. And then if you cycle between them, do phases, you end up minimizing the negatives, because what are the negatives of powerlifting training? Eventually you start to get joint pain. You start to stress basically the seams, right? Yeah, you start to fry yourself a little bit. What are the negatives of the bodybuilding training? Well, you don't get the muscle density. You don't get the ability to really fire your muscles in a unified way, as organized as you'd like.
You're like compartmentalized.
Yeah, you can kind of become very compartmentalized. You'll see this with bodybuilders, by the way. When you ever try and have a bodybuilder do like a kettlebell swing, it's like they're doing a front shoulder raise, reverse curl type of deal. Right. So they both can benefit. You can benefit from learning both. What you don't want to do is use the wrong mentality for the wrong training cycle. That's when things get mixed up.
Well, the true masters of kinesiology have the ability to move in and out of this. I mean, that's when I see somebody who is really understands human movement and understands the values of all these different modalities. Like, you have that. I mean, it takes a lot of self-awareness. It takes, I think, a lot of practice. Like, this is not a year one of lifting. Have you figured this out? I mean, it takes some time under the bar to be able to figure this out, how to do this.
And this can't be overstated. The mental aspect of training for long-term success is the most important part. It's more important than anything else. And the reason why, if you follow one of our MAPS programs, the way we phase our workouts are typically in 3 and 4 week blocks. So for 3 or 4 weeks, you're training this low rep range. The mentality is more like a power lifter. You're looking at leverage and technique in that particular context. And then, okay, phase 3 or phase 2, higher reps, trying to get a pump, change the mentality, train more like a bodybuilder, focus on the glutes, focus on the hamstrings, the lats, the pecs, whatever the exercise calls for. The reason why we phase them that way versus Monday is heavy, Wednesday is light, Friday is in between. Like, because studies show that both methods seem to be relatively equal in terms of muscle growth. But I disagree because the mental
psychological component,
getting into the mental space of training like a powerlifter typically takes me 3 or 4 workouts. 3 or 4 workouts into it, now I've got the feel for the lifts. For the bodybuilding style, it's the same thing. Getting out of that powerlifting mentality, getting into feel the muscle, not pay attention so much to the weight, that requires another 3 or 4 workouts. And when I switch back and forth, it can sometimes get mixed up, and I'm experienced. So I can't imagine the average person trying to do something like that.
I would like to add to this conversation another very valuable, character to emulate would be the athlete.
Yeah.
Because that's a whole nother mindset and way of thinking going in your training
Totally.
too. Like the ability to stabilize and decelerate and accelerate explosively,
accelerate,
and control, and with speed, right, and power. Like I mean, all 3 of those are very unique. When you think of a powerlifter, bodybuilder, and then you think of like the athlete / maybe Olympic lifter would be like someone who would be close to explaining that, and like those are. They're very different the way you approach the bar and how you lift the weight.
So I will say this about
fast, loose.
Oh God, you hit the nail on the head. Athletes, so powerlifters understand tension and like, let's just ramp up the CNS and go, right? And a powerlifter would be more like an athlete in terms of strength sports than the bodybuilder, more so, right? Because they compete in actual like competition in that sense. Athletes, they know how to be tense and they also know when to be loose. So if you watch an athlete play a sport, when they need to turn it up, it is fire. Muscles are on. And when they need to be loose, they be loose. Why? Because you can't be tense all the time. You're going to die. After 5 minutes.
Tension restricts movement.
Yes. So that's I'm so glad you said that, because learning how to do like mobility and train in multiplanar movements and have an athletic mindset is neither bodybuilder or powerlifter.
That's right.
In fact, if you go into that kind of stuff, training first off, you train like a bodybuilder, you're not going to move well because you're going to think bicep, tricep, shoulder. It's not going to work that way.
Yeah.
If you think like a powerlifter, you're going to gas out after 30 seconds because you got to know when to be loose, when to conserve energy, and when to expel it.
It's interesting to think about because it is kind of the ultimate hybrid of those mentalities, and to be able to generate as much force as you can from like your power lifter. So the power lifter's entire process is to just generate as much force as possible and then have the mechanics to go through that movement as efficiently as they can. Whereas, the athlete, it wants to be able to spark that type of force production, but then control that and be loose to be able to manipulate their body so they can propel their body in certain directions in a fluid way, but then bring it back under control right away. So it's like, it gets, in terms of complexity, I would say, I guess powerlifting and bodybuilding are probably somewhat equal, but then that's sort of another layer of components.
I would say athletic is the pinnacle.
That's the ultimate expression.
That's the pinnacle. Yeah, because that's definitely
expressing.
You got to put it all together.
Yeah, because I mean, the closest thing that you would relate to that outside of like sport specific training would be Olympic lifting.
Yes,
and that is the pinnacle.
That would be
lifting.
The one sort of in between. I would say.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely the pinnacle. This tip that I know you didn't intend for this to be like this massive MAPS commercial, but I mean, literally, this is why I recently came out and said, like, man, I would love to hear from somebody who literally goes through every single MAPS program and follows it to a T, because we have thought about that in the programming of all of these, that you should get some of that application throughout all these programs as you go through them. And when you get done, like, you have a lot of tools in your tool belt. And this is something I take a lot of pride in, the fact that I can get in the gym and I can lift and look kind of like a power. If you saw me deadlift and squat, I've got pretty good depth and range, got pretty good form and technique and I can lift pretty good weight. That's like, okay, not the strongest guy in the gym by any means, but it's like, that guy can power lift pretty well. He's strong like that. Then I can also get out there. I could do a jump box and look like an athlete when I do it. And then I get out there and I can train with great control and technique like a bodybuilder and move in and out of all that stuff.
And by the way, training in these different modalities, just for people who are more aesthetic focused, actually produces the best aesthetics. And I need to explain that for a second. Aesthetics isn't just how you look posing in a picture. Aesthetics in the real world is you're watching someone move and walk. Yep. Okay, you're watching someone squat down or sit down or twist and turn. So aesthetics isn't just how ripped and muscular you look when you're standing posing, but rather also how you move. And we've all seen that guy or girl, right? They look really amazing standing still, but as soon as they start moving, they look very non-fluid, almost awkward, right? So all this type of training produces a muscular, lean, fluid physique that actually gives you real aesthetics in the real world. You look healthy and you look like you can move really well. I remember experiencing that in jiu-jitsu. You know, there were guys that were brown belts and black belts, so very experienced doing jiu-jitsu for 9 to 10 years, who I could cream them with stamina and endurance and strength in the gym. At the time, this is when I was doing jiu-jitsu for a while, I could beat them in stamina, I could beat them in a circuit, I could beat them lifting, but then we'd hit the mats and I'd be gassed out and those guys would be like, whatever. And they would tell me it's because they're like, I know when to relax. Like you're sitting there tense this whole time and they know how to relax and flow. You ever ride, remember the first few times you rode like a dirt bike and you're going over bumps and you're just so tired because you're just holding on so hard?
Because you're so tense.
Yes. So athletes know how to do that. And that's an important skill as well. And training like an athlete, you know, MAPS Performance has got some phase 2s like that, where you got to learn how to do that. You're going to die. Like you do the matrix lunges and all.
You acquire through practice. And then that's the biggest thing is like most athletes are going to be rigid like that. They're going to be stiff. They're going to be tense. And it takes your body already has these natural governings in place to keep you safe and protect your joints and all that stuff. It takes, you know, that many hours and hours of practice to be able to provide that feedback that everything's going to be safe and is under control, and you have the strength and ability to control your body on that level.
Yes.
I think for the general population that's listening, one of the things to take away that is we all tend to gravitate towards a way of training or identify as a group. And the more you challenge yourself, the more benefits that you can receive, right? Like if you always train like a bodybuilder and you apply, and yes, you manipulate rep ranges, things like that, but you still apply that mindset into the way you lift all the time, like you're only allowing yourself to reap so many benefits from training through all. When you learn to move in and out of these modalities and take those mentalities into lifting, you'll open up more. Yeah.
Each one of these avatars have desirable characteristics. I mean, if anything you've seen in the fitness arena, you've seen like those like few things. If you say like bodybuilding, like you'll pick those aesthetic focuses out. Like this is my desired outcome. I want those right out of here. Or if I'm an athlete, I want to be able to move at this, you know, level and be explosive. And you could do that along the board of all these different types of avatars we create. But there's something to be said about like being able to extract those characteristics and incorporate, you know, all of those.
And even for people who compete in these sports, there's someone listening who's like, well, I'm a powerlifter. Like I compete in powerlifting. Well, you don't have to devote equal time to bodybuilding style training and to mobility as you do to powerlifting, but it will benefit you to dip into those to break up your normal training cycle. So it would be great if you do like a 12-week powerlifting block, it'd be good to throw in a couple weeks of bodybuilding or mobility focused type training, and you'll end up just getting stronger. Same thing with a bodybuilder.
You're going to need to eventually, and I'll tell you why. You know what eventually happens is you hit your goal. Like, so I 100% identified as the bodybuilder type of guy well, then eventually I hit my ultimate bodybuilding goal. And then it was kind of like, oh,
boring.
What now?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like I reached the pinnacle of this thing that I had been chasing my whole life as a young boy into young adulthood into training. And then you reach that and it's like, oh, well, I want this to be a lifelong pursuit. Well, I no longer have this big goal anymore because I've achieved it. So it's kind of like, I just keep doing the same thing over. And I'm always going to fall short now of what that like. So for me, for sanity reasons, and I think that everybody will eventually reach this if you're super focused on one thing. If you want to be the best OCR racer, you want to be the best power, you eventually kind of reach that goal. And if you're not only just doing that for this specific goal or sport or thing you like, and you want this to be a lifelong pursuit of health, you're going to need to move out of that, or else you're just be letting yourself down all the time. I mean, if I compared my physique always to my top physique that I've had before, I'm going to be let down about my training all the time. So
but you can have better mobility.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I had to force myself to go like, okay, I'm no longer the bodybuilding guy. I need to identify as the mobility guy for a while, or the strength guy for a while, you know, or the sport guy for a while. Like I think it's important to do that if you want to make this a lifelong pursuit.
This is all fitness wisdom is what it is. You talk to people who've been doing it for a long time, like 10 plus years consistently, who are people who worked out consistently for 10 years are very likely to work out for the rest of their life to keep it consistent. That's fitness wisdom. So that's the kind of advice that's going to help you stay consistent and do this forever.